If you love wisdom, put your mind up to the ceiling. Don't let it stay in the gutter. Don't let your heart get all cluttered. No, I did not stutter. Listen to all that I've muttered. Your life will only go well if you in wisdom or lovers.
If you're in love with wisdom, come inside.
Come inside. Come inside.
The truth will surely rescue you and I.
You and I. You and I.
If you're in love with wisdom, come inside.
Come inside. Come inside.
The truth will surely rescue you and I.
All right, what's going on? And welcome to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. We are on hour 2 of the show today, and what we're going to be talking about next is the wisdom of theocentricity. Okay, so you may be asking yourself, like, what is that? What is he talking about now? Well, we're going to get into that after this. It's going to be a good show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
If you're in love with wisdom, come inside.
Come inside.
All right, welcome back to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. Today we are discussing the wisdom of theocentricity. Okay, what is theocentricity? Well, first, just as a reminder, this show is a show on philosophy. And why do we call this show For the Love of Wisdom? Well, it comes from 2 Greek words. The first one, philo. The second one, sophos. Put those together, philosophos. Philo means love, sophos means wisdom. So that's where we get the title, because philosophy literally means the love of wisdom. And wisdom is the ability to make proper judgments. It's having good sense, and it's having insight. And it's the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. So all those things are really important. And that's why we talk about this every week, because it's really the most important thing we could ever do. If you don't have wisdom, you're going to make a lot of bad decisions in life. And why make bad decisions when you can make excellent decisions? So again, you can always check out past episodes. If this is your first time listening to For the Love of Wisdom and you like what you hear, you can always listen to past episodes on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Google Play Music, or if you have an Amazon enabled device, you can just say, Alexa, play For the Love of Wisdom, and it'll bring that up for you, so you can listen to it hands-free if you need to. Again, For the Love of Wisdom is a show on philosophy, but it's also, philosophy with a little bit of a twist, because it is where philosophy meets the streets. On the last episode, we were talking about the wisdom of authenticity. We're talking about being authentic. And there's actually a couple verses from the Bible that stand out to me that I'd like to share with you as it relates to authenticity. The first one is John chapter 8, verse 32. And here Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." Or as some translations say, the truth will set you free. And this is important to remember. There's people who feel like they need to lie their way through lives, through their life, and always come up with a story, always try to cover themselves. But Jesus clearly says that it's the truth that sets you free. Being authentic, it's hard for a lot of people to do that, especially out of fear that people aren't going to accept them, but it's the best way to live. Another one here, James chapter 5, verse 16. It says, "So always tell each other the wrong things that you have done. Then pray for each other. Do this so that God can heal you. Anyone who lives the way that God wants can pray, and great things will happen." Now, this is important because it's basically saying that if you do something that's wrong, if you sin, you should actually share this with other people. Why? Why would you want to expose yourself? Why would you want to put yourself out there? Well, this is saying that if you do that, this is actually a way that you can be healed. This is a way that you can be set free. just by sharing what's going on with you. And one more I want to just share. Exodus chapter 20 verse 16, and it says, "You must not tell lies about other people." Now this is really important too, because when it comes to being authentic, it's not just about being yourself, but it's also about not misrepresenting others too, because if you're saying something about somebody that's not true, regardless of how true you are to yourself and other circumstances, you're not being authentic, right? You're slandering somebody, you're making somebody else look bad, and that's not cool. So that is it for that discussion on authenticity. But if you missed it, you can always listen back again on iTunes, Spotify, anywhere where you like listening to podcasts. And today we're talking about theocentricity. And here's a verse that stands out to me that I think really represents this. It's from Psalm 103 verse 19, and it says, "The Lord set his throne up in heaven, and he rules over everything." Okay, so with that backdrop, let's take a look at what this word theocentricity actually means. It's a bigger word than maybe what it sounds like, but let's break it down. Let's take off the suffix ity. Theocentric. What is centric? It means you're focusing on something, you're centering on something. Theo, it's a Greek word for God, theos. So when we're talking about being theocentric, we're talking about being God focused, God centric. And Collins Dictionary says that the word theocentric means centering on or directed toward God as a focus of interest, a source of authority. Basically, it also says that to be theocentric is to have God as the focal point of your attention. Webster's Dictionary defines theocentric as having God as the central interest and ultimate concern. So basically, this is just saying that, God is more important than anything else that there is in life. So he's more important than how you feel about yourself or how you feel about others. He's more important than whatever your circumstances are. He's more important than your fears. He's more important than your failures. God is supreme. He's sovereign, and he's greater than any obstacle that you can have in your life. He's greater than your greatest day. He's greater than your greatest accomplishments. He is above all things. And, basically, to have a theocentric mindset is to get out of the opposite of that, because the opposite of that is what? It's this sense of autocentrism, when you're just thinking about self, you're just thinking about all things concerning you and your world, and you're not concerned about the things that God cares about. All you care about is you. All you care about is what you're going to get out of life. All you care about is things that directly benefit you. But when we're living with a mindset that's theocentric, basically what we're saying is we're willing to put ourselves aside and focus on the greater good. We're going to focus on what's important to God. And what's important to God is beyond our human comprehension, honestly. I mean, when you think about it, who can say that they really know what God is up to? If somebody could say, oh, this is what God is thinking right now, or this is exactly what he's planning, this person would be a trillionaire, right? But God is awesome. There's nobody who can say that they know exactly what he's doing. Now, we know that he reveals himself to us in his word, so of course there's things that we know about him, but you can never be 10 steps ahead of him. Not even one step. The closest you'll probably get is 1,000,000 steps behind. And that's probably an understatement, right? Because he's God. He's sovereign over everything. He's above everything. And theocentrism is really important. It's something that is not focused on in the society that we live in, because there is this huge focus on self. This huge focus on self-wisdom, self-preservation, just self-glorification, and not a high emphasis on glorifying God as the creator of the universe, as sovereign. And that's why I wanted to talk about this today, because I think that it's important, for us to get back to that mind state of remembering that God is sovereign. God is above everything. He is the reason why we breathe. He's the reason why we have life. He gives us purpose. He gives us meaning. Without him, what would we really be? What would we really have? Nothing, really. So it's important that we remember that. But more on that after this. You're listening to North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. And we'll be back in a few minutes. We're going to play some music for you, and we'll be right back to it.
It's your girl Queen Z from the Queen Z Show, and you are listening to For the Love of Wisdom.
Hey, what's going on, and welcome back. You're listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. So on today's show, we are talking about the wisdom of theocentricity. Long word, but it's not really too hard to understand. Again, theo or theos, it just means God. Centric, it just means focus. And when you put them together, it's basically just having a God focus, being God centered, as opposed to being self-centered. It's being God centered. It means, just being concerned with what God is concerned about, being concerned with who he is and his impact in the world. So just to give an understanding about what theocentricity or theocentrism is all about, I wanted to take you through the encyclopedia a little bit and just see what this is really talking about here, so that we can have a good understanding of it. Theocentricity basically is the center of all natural and supernatural reality being God. That's what that means. It means that the center of all natural and supernatural reality is God. And so it says that all being basically, initially and ultimately, focuses around and in the transcendent God and finds him in what is the most important reason or purpose for someone or something's existence. And that could be pretty wordy, so let's just kind of backtrack a little bit. What we're basically saying is that whether you or I focus on God in this way, it really doesn't matter, because what this is saying is that in himself, he is most important. He is the reason that all things exist. He's the reason that there's life. He's the reason that people can reason, right? This is saying that pretty much all of creation, everything that you can see, even things that you can't see, it's all surrounding God. It's kind of like, planets orbiting around the sun, as opposed to the sun orbiting around those planets. Sometimes as human beings, we can feel like we're most important. Sometimes we say, I don't have room for God. I don't have a need for God. I'm self-sufficient. Like, why would I need him? But they forget he doesn't revolve around them. They revolve around him. This encyclopedia, again, and this is from the New Catholic Encyclopedia. This was published in 2003. And it says, in philosophy, theocentrism may ultimately be regarded as an answer to man's intellectual quest for a unified explanation of the orientation of his own being to the whole order of being. So it's giving a philosophical explanation of theocentrism, because when it comes down to it in philosophy, what this is saying is This is basically man's quest for an explanation of where he comes from. In science, there are several different theories that try to explain how human beings originated, how this whole world originated. A popular theory is the Big Bang Theory, that everything that came to be happened by a random explosion. Now, a lot of people agree with this. They believe this. Whether they believe in God or not, a lot of people believe in this. The difference is that those who believe in God would say that this Big Bang was caused by God himself, and this is the way that he created the world. Whereas those who don't believe in God may say that this was something that happened on its own. It was random. Nobody set it in motion. It was just set in motion by itself. Now, there's just so many issues with that, though, that it's hard to say that this was started randomly, because every cause has an effect, right? You can't have one without the other. How could something random, how can something come out of nothing? It just doesn't make sense. But man, for the thousands of years, some would say millions, but however long human beings have been on this earth, man has been searching for meaning. Man has been searching for purpose. What is our reason for being here? I don't think that the animals have that same perplexity. I don't think that, chimpanzees or zebras or lions are going through life wondering, why am I here? They're not reading books. They're not holding conferences and doing college lectures trying to get to the bottom of all of this. They know why they're here: to eat, to sleep, and to protect themselves from their enemies or whatever. That's basically what it is in the animal kingdom. You don't have a whole lot of philosophers in the jungle or in the wilderness. It just doesn't happen, because their life is simpler. But as human beings, we always have to know, why this, why that, where do I come from, where am I going, is God real or is God not real? We have all of these perplexing questions that makes us distinct from the rest of creation. It's interesting. And one thing that theocentrism really talks about is how there is ultimately one necessary absolute being, independent of and transcending any other. And this is speaking of God. It's saying that there has to be something bigger than everything else, or else everything else would have no meaning. So an automobile cannot be greater than its manufacturer. An automobile with no manufacturer lacks meaning, because it's the manufacturer that is able to define that automobile, and only that manufacturer. Toyota actually makes Lexus cars, and a lot of people don't know that, but it's really the same company. So Toyota can define a Lexus, or it can define a Toyota, because that's the manufacturer. But Toyota cannot define a BMW. Toyota cannot define a Chevy, right? Because that's not the right manufacturer. Only Chevy can define Chevy. Only Volkswagen can define a Volkswagen, or one of the other types of cars that they make. And we have to remember that if God is the one that created all of us, then He is the only one who can define us. He is the one that gives us meaning. He's the one that gives our lives purpose, because without him, what purpose do we really have in life? Because if he created us, then that means that he had a particular goal in mind for us in creating us. It can't just be by chance. We're not like animals. We're not content with just, running around and eating and sleeping. We know, all of us know instinctively, that there's more to life than that. Because God is the one that put that desire within us to seek out more. And the good thing about God is he didn't just give us that desire, but he's able to fulfill that desire in him. And as we're getting ready to go on into this next song here, I think this is the perfect title. It's called I'll Pray. Because if we need wisdom, if we need to know who God is, we can always pray and he'll tell us.
It's your boy, Tear It Up, Tommy Tom from Beyond Sports, and you're listening to For the Love of Wisdom
with your host, Jason Johnson.
Right, what's going on? Welcome back. You're listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. And on today's episode, we are discussing the wisdom of theocentricity. And what is theocentricity? Again, it is basically being God-focused. Theo or theos means God. Centric basically means focus. So we're putting our attention on him as opposed to being self-centered or self-focused. It means just being God-focused, being God-centered. And that's really important in the world that we live in, because the world that we live in was created by God. So why not be focused on the person who created the world? I mean, that sounds like a pretty good idea to me. An article that really stood out to me, it was one that was published by Desiring God, and it is about the sovereignty of God. So we're talking about the centrality of God, but we also have to, speak of his sovereignty, because really the two go hand in hand. And, what this is saying here is that there are no limits to God's rule. This is, part of what it means to be God. So if I was God, or if you were God, what that would mean is that we would have total control over everything that happens in the world that we live in. So that means that we would have control over the weather. It means that we would have control over who is born and who is not. Human beings think that it's just them who are the ones who create people, but you got to remember that there's a lot to conception, and that's, getting into, biology and, hormones and ovaries and eggs and, a whole bunch of other stuff. Right. And so we don't really have time to get into all of that. But one thing that's important to remember is this: not everybody is successful when they're trying to have children, right? There are some times when people can try, maybe they're trying for years and they're not successful for whatever reason. And there's some people who, they meet someone, they had a little bit too much to drink, and the next thing you know, a couple weeks later, they find out that they're expecting a child and they weren't even trying for it. It's just funny how things work sometimes, and people think that everything that happens is just a coincidence, but really there's no coincidences. God is a creator. He creates human beings, and he knows when it's time for a person to be in this world, whether those parents are ready for that or not. Sometimes if God is ready to bring someone in this world, he does it because he's sovereign. He's the one he ultimately has control over all these things. And some people will say, well, if God has control, then why doesn't he stop bad things from happening? Why doesn't he stop evil from happening? But him being sovereign doesn't mean that he makes life and circumstances easy for everybody, because there are things that we don't understand. We may not understand why, for example, why would God allow this person to get run over by an ice cream truck? You would say, well, if God really cared about people, then he wouldn't allow that to happen. But then guess what? You never know what's really the outcome of that. You never know what's behind that, because what if this person who got run over by that ice cream truck, maybe that person was getting ready to commit a mass murder or something, and they would have killed 20 other people. Or maybe this was a really good person, a person who would never do something like that. However, if they didn't get hit by that truck, something even worse would have happened to them. Maybe they would have been kidnapped and tortured for 100 hours or something like that. I mean, you never know, right? So anything that's bad, just imagine that it could really be 1,000,000 times worse than even that. So I think that God, in his protection and in his mercy for humankind, sometimes he does things that people don't understand, but it's really in people's best interest. And that's a lot for anyone to wrap their mind around. I mean, that's a lot for me to wrap my mind around, because sometimes we don't understand why things happen. But if we trust that God is sovereign and he's in control, then what that means is that ultimately he knows better than anyone why something has to happen. And I mean, that's an incredibly hard job. That's why I'm glad I don't have that job. You should be glad that you don't have that job either. Because imagine if you were responsible for that. Imagine if you had millions of people hating you because of your decisions. Even if you believe that your decisions are the best ones for whatever reason, not everybody understands that, and that's got to be difficult. But even when we don't love God, even when we have unbelief, he still loves us. He still believes in us, and that's something that's really important to remember as we're talking about theocentricity. If God is, greater than all of us, he doesn't really owe us anything. Yet he still chooses, not because he has to, but he makes the choice to give us grace, to give us love, to give us mercy. And that's a reminder of how we need to treat each other. Because if God, who is perfect, deals with us who are completely imperfect, then we definitely have to give that same type of grace and understanding to other imperfect people. One thing the article says here is, it says that whenever God acts, he acts in a way that pleases him. God is never constrained to do a thing that he despises. He's never backed into a corner where his only resource is to do something he hates to do. He does whatever he pleases. This is something that scripture says, that, God does whatever he pleases. And again, this doesn't mean that he does something that's evil. God never does anything evil. He only does what's good. But, he's never in a situation where he's forced to do something. He's never like, man, I really wish I didn't have to do this, but I'm forced to do this because this person said this or did that or whatever. And now I have to step in and do this thing I hate to do. No, God has purposes that are beyond our comprehension, and everything that he does is for a reason. And ultimately what he does is for the, to glorify himself, and also for the good of all people. One thing it says here is that Jesus did not only offer salvation to the world, but he also brought his people to himself to overcome their rebellion, to gather them omnipotently to himself. Again, God's purposes are greater than anything that we can imagine. It says that the ultimate reason that suffering exists in the universe is so that Christ might display the greatness of the glory of the grace of God by suffering in himself to overcome our suffering. And that's powerful too, because we were talking earlier about how can God allow bad things to happen? How can he allow suffering? But you have to remember that God showed that he understood our suffering and understands our suffering because of the way that he was tortured on the cross. He suffered greatly, far more than either you or me have suffered. And you may say, well, no, he hasn't suffered more than me. But guess what? If you're still alive and you're breathing and you're hearing me say this, then you haven't suffered more than Jesus did on the cross. There's no way. One other thing it says in the article, it says, The risen and reigning King of Kings and Lord of Lords rules over this world and over his mission with absolute sovereignty. Nothing is outside his sovereign will. If he meets with resistance, he either allows it for his purposes or he overcomes it for his purposes. And that's a good one too. We're going to have to get more into that when we come back from the break, because that's a lot to unpack in just a few seconds. But this is an awesome article. I would definitely recommend checking it out. It was published by Desiring God, and you're listening to North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. This is For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets.
You're now listening to For the Love of Wisdom on NorthCoastUnderground.com, where the underground starts with who? No other but you.
All right, welcome back to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. We're about to conclude the show for today, but as we're wrapping up our conversation on the wisdom of theocentricity, just wanted to go back to the article we were looking at that was published by Desiring God. The last thing we were reading, it says that the risen and reigning King of Kings and Lord of Lords rules over this world and over his mission with absolute sovereignty. Nothing is outside his sovereign will. If he meets with resistance, he either allows it for his purposes or he overcomes it for his purposes. Now, one thing that this is saying, and I think it's really crucial that we understand this, if something bad happens, something evil happens, right? Now, God is not evil. God doesn't want evil to happen to people. He wants good to happen to people. However, there are times when God allows it. And why is that? Does he allow it because the evil is more powerful than him and he's not able to stop it? No, not at all. Not at all. God has purposes that go beyond our understanding. And sometimes he'll allow one bad thing to happen because he knows that something else that's good is going to come on the other side of it. And those are tough calls to make. Again, as I said earlier, that's why I'm glad I'm not God. You should be glad that you're not God, so that, we don't have that kind of major responsibility. I mean, who wants to have to deal with that, right? Talk about customer service, people not understanding what you're doing and why you're doing it. Imagine how often God is misunderstood, and when he has the greatest intentions, because he's perfect and he doesn't ever do anything that's evil. He only does what's good, but not everybody understands it because not everybody sees the big picture. But God sees the end of the rainbow, right? He sees what's on the other side. Couple quotes that were that really stood out to me. One is by Matt Chandler, and he said that trying to figure out God is like trying to catch a fish in the Pacific Ocean with an inch of dental floss. That's pretty good, right? Yeah, we can't understand the mind of God. We can't understand or comprehend why he does what he does, but we have to have faith. We have to trust that he knows what he's doing. He's not just haphazardly ruling the world. He's actually pretty good at being sovereign over the world. He's been doing this since before the beginning of time, right? Not even since the beginning of time, but since before time. He has been sovereign, and he will continue to be sovereign. So we have to trust that he knows what he's doing. Here's one from Vernon McGee. He said, "This is God's universe, and God does things his way. You may only have, he said, you may have a better way, but you don't have a universe," right? So you may think that you know better than God, right? But guess what? He's God and you're not. So ultimately, you can say what you want, think what you want, but he is the one who's sovereign and not us. One from Margaret Clarkson. God is the Lord of human history and of the personal history of every member of his redeemed family. And again, this just goes to show you that God's fingerprint has been everywhere, all throughout time. There's never a time in history where God has been absent. Even in something horrible that happens, you could say, what about when major genocide happens, or when schools get shot up or whatever? But no matter what it is, God is never absent. He's always there. Maybe not in ways that people can see or understand at the time, but he's always there, and he always has a greater purpose. What does the Bible say about this topic? 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 11 and 12. It says that greatness, power, glory, victory, and honor belong to you, because everything in heaven and on earth belongs to you. Right? So everything is God's. Everything. Not some things or most things, but everything. It says the kingdom belongs to you, Lord. You are the head, the ruler over everything. Riches and honor come from you. You rule everything. You have the power and strength in your hand, and in your hand is the power to make anyone great and powerful. And that's something great to keep in mind, you know. God is powerful. God is sovereign. You know, nothing catches him off guard. There's nothing that's too great for him. Isaiah chapter 46 verses 9 and 10 says that, remember what happened long ago. Remember, I am God and there is no other God. There is no other like me. In the beginning, I told you what would happen in the end. A long time ago, I told you things that have not happened yet. When I plan something, it happens. I do whatever I want to do. And again, this is not arrogance. This is not, God saying, I do whatever I want to do, so therefore I don't care about what you feel about it. I don't care about what you're going through. No, that's not what this is saying at all. But this is saying basically there is nothing that hinders God. Nobody's holding him back. Nobody is forcing him to go right or left. Ultimately, this is saying that he is sovereign. He is sovereign. He has full control over himself and over whatever he allows or doesn't allow in this life. And it's up to us as human beings to trust that. We have to trust that God knows what he's doing. And sometimes maybe we feel like we know better than God, or we can advise him and say, hey, God, I don't know if you got this right. I think you might be missing it here. But who are we? Who are we as human beings who were created by God to tell God how to be God? That's like a Toyota telling the Toyota manufacturer how they need to create Toyotas. It doesn't happen that way. It's the other way around. A Pathfinder doesn't complain to Nissan and say you got it wrong. The Pathfinder just does what Nissan wants that Pathfinder to do. And as hard as it may be for us to do that at times, we have to do the same. We have to remember that God is sovereign and God is greater than us. God has a greater mind than us. He's the one who gave us the minds that we have to be able to think. If you think about a computer was created by a human being, right? But even a computer is not as intelligent as the human brain. So God created the human brain. How much more intelligent is he than a human being? How much greater is he than us? That's all for today, though. Thank you for hanging out with me. We'll be back next week, Thursday at 4 o'clock. North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you.
Knowledge is power, power is money, and money makes the world go round. Money, power, respect, I get it, higher, learning, yeah, I'm with it. Only get better with time, you got on my mind with wisdom, there's no limit. There's no limit, get up and get it. Can achieve the impossible, conquer every obstacle. Exhausted from grind and constantly push and do what they say I could. Life is what you make it. Knowledge is power, don't let them take it.
If you're in love with wisdom, come inside.
Come inside. Come inside.
The truth will surely rescue you and I.
You and I. You and I.
If you're in love with wisdom, come inside.
Come inside. Come inside.
The truth will surely rescue you and I.
One dribble, steps back, puts up a three. Won't go. Rebound tip taken by Spades. Final seconds.